If you're just getting into woodworking and you're looking for a good blade for your table saw, you've probably been led to believe that thin kerf is the way to go. I was too, but it turned out that thin kerf was not the way to go for me. In fact, I think I just wasted a bunch of money and time and frustrated myself dealing with thin kerf blades. To show you what I'm talking about, I'm going to set up some tests. I'll create 8 sample boards with 3 lines each. I'll take a measurement at each line. Then I'll cut each board on the table saw with a different blade. After the cut, I'll put the boards back together and take another measurement at each line. I'll subtract the first measurement from the second measurement to find the amount of wood that was lost for the cut. I'll also be able to look at cut quality. In my experience, blade kerf is not the most important performance and quality factor for my table saw. Choosing the right blade type, making sure the blade is clean and free of any gunk or wood pitch, making sure I don't have any dull, chipped, or bent teeth, making sure that my miter slot is aligned with the table saw blade and so is the fence, and also eliminating any bad technique such as wrong blade height, too slow or too fast of a feed rate, or a bad feed method. Switching over to a thin kerf blade doesn't really change the quality of the results if those other factors aren't corrected first. As I get the testing started, I'd like to point out that this is really the ideal test condition for each of these blades. It's a thin piece of 1/2-inch plywood that's relatively short, so there's not a lot of forces twisting the piece as I feed it through. I'm feeding at the most consistent feed rate I can for each test. And I'm using the gripper to apply the right pressure all the way through the cut. Obviously, in most woodworking, we don't deal with ideal settings like this all the time. For those of you who are wondering, this is a Shopsmith table saw system. In order to change the blade, you have to raise the main table. In order to raise the main table, I have to disconnect it from the auxiliary table. That's why you see me walking around the table saw at each change. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's really nothing once you get used to it. Now I'll remeasure each line for each sample piece to determine how much wood was lost during the cut. Somehow, the Miter Master took less wood than the thickness of the kerf. I have to say the Master Force was a good performer. The wood loss was just a little bit thicker than the thickness of the kerf. The Ashland had the largest wood loss over kerf thickness, but the surface was glue ready and almost pristine. The CMT Fine Finish, another good performer, very little additional wood loss over the thickness of the blade. The Shopsmith combination blade did a great job, a little bit of blade marks, but glue ready. The Irwin would require some light sanding before I'd feel comfortable gluing that surface together. The CMT ripping blade would require heavy sanding. Forest allows 1/1000th of an inch wobble for their Woodworker 2 blades. If you add that to the kerf measurement, you get almost exactly the wood loss. Let's take a look at all the information side by side. I'll start at the bottom with the Forest Miter Master, because this is a specialty blade specifically designed to cut miters. I did use it in this case to cut through plywood, and it resulted in a highly burnished, if not burnt, surface. Those types of surfaces aren't great for gluing and staining. So let's exclude the Miter Master from the rest of the discussion. I basically have two options. I can use a combination blade for both rips, crosscuts, and cutting plywood, or I can have two blades, one for ripping hardwoods and the other for crosscuts and cutting plywood. The cross-cutting and the plywood cutting, no problem. Both of these inexpensive blades you see here, the CMT Fine Finish and the Master Force Fine Finish, do a great job on crosscuts and plywood. It's not really an issue. The challenge for me has come in the ripping. These inexpensive ripping blades don't leave a clean enough surface for me. And I know from experience that when working with hardwood, the problem may even be worse. Ironically, the full kerf combination blades that I have are doing everything really well. They cross-cut just as well as the fine finish blades. They cut plywood just as well as the fine finish blades. And they also do a great job ripping. So in the final analysis, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't have wasted my time with thin kerf blades. I would have just stuck with the blades that came with my table saw, which were regular kerf blades, and learned properly how to use my table saw to get the performance that I really wanted.